There's a quiet kind of danger that doesn't look like danger at all, and it shows up in everyday conversations, in random arguments, in small moments that slowly drain your energy without you even noticing it at first. You don't suffer because people are smart. You suffer because some people don't think at all. And the worst part is not their behavior, it's the fact that you keep expecting logic where there is none, expecting awareness where there is none, expecting change where there is no intention to change. That's where the real damage begins. Because when someone lacks awareness, they don't see the consequences of their actions, and when they don't see consequences, they repeat the same patterns again and again, pulling others into their chaos. And somewhere in that loop, people like you start losing peace, time, and focus, not because you are weak, but because you are trying to deal with something that doesn't respond to reason. And that's the trap most people never learn to escape. The uncomfortable truth is that intelligence alone doesn't protect you from these situations. You can be calm, logical, and patient and still end up frustrated, still end up emotionally drained, still end up questioning yourself. Because the problem is not your ability to think, the problem is assuming that the other person is operating on the same level of awareness as you. And once that assumption breaks, everything starts to make sense in a different way. The repeated arguments, the pointless debates, the unnecessary conflicts, the strange reactions that seem completely out of place, they are not random, they follow a pattern of impulsive behavior, emotional reactions, and a complete lack of reflection. And if you don't recognize that pattern early, you end up engaging with it, feeding it, and becoming part of it without realizing it. There's a reason why some people can stay calm in situations where others lose control. It's not because they are stronger in the traditional sense. It's because they understand something most people ignore. Not every situation deserves a response. Not every person deserves your explanation. And not every problem can be solved through communication. This goes against everything people are taught. The idea that you can fix things by talking, that you can solve misunderstandings by explaining more, that you can change behavior by being patient enough, but real life doesn't always work that way. Some behaviors are not based on misunderstanding. They are based on a refusal to think, a refusal to take responsibility, a refusal to grow. And once you see that clearly, your entire approach starts to shift. There are hidden psychological patterns behind this that rarely get talked about. One of them is the illusion of control, the belief that if you say the right words in the right way, you can influence anyone. Another is emotional contagion, where the energy of someone else slowly starts affecting your own state of mind without you noticing it. Over time, repeated exposure to irrational behavior can lower your own clarity, your own patience, your own ability to stay grounded. This is why even the most composed individuals can lose control in certain environments. It's not because they suddenly changed, it's because they stayed in the wrong dynamic for too long. And that's exactly why protection matters more than correction. History and human behavior studies quietly support this idea. In many cases, conflicts don't escalate because of one major event. They escalate because of repeated small interactions where one side keeps engaging with irrational patterns. Over time, those small moments build pressure, and eventually that pressure turns into frustration, anger, or complete withdrawal. What looks like a sudden reaction is usually the result of long-term exposure. And once that reaction happens, the focus shifts away from the original problem and onto the response itself. This is how people lose control of the situation. Not in one moment, but through a series of unnoticed decisions to engage when they should have stepped back. The real question is not how to change these people. That's the mistake. The real question is how to protect yourself from people who don't even realize they are the problem. Because if someone lacks awareness, they don't self-correct. If they don't self-correct, they repeat. And if they repeat, they create a cycle that pulls in anyone who reacts to it. That's where most people get stuck. They keep trying different approaches, different tones, different strategies, hoping something will work, hoping something will finally get through. But the deeper truth is simple and hard to accept. Some people are not looking for understanding. They are looking for reaction. And the moment you react, the cycle continues. In this video, you're going to learn how to break that cycle completely, not by fighting harder, not by explaining better, but by understanding the mechanics behind these interactions and using that understanding to stay in control. You'll see why ignoring certain behaviors is not weakness, why silence can be more powerful than words, why distance can solve problems that confrontation never could. You'll understand the difference between emotional reaction and strategic response, and why that difference changes everything. You'll also discover subtle techniques that protect your energy without creating more conflict, ways to stay calm without suppressing yourself, and ways to disengage without feeling guilty. There are also lesser-known dynamics that most people overlook. For example, how repeated exposure to irrational behavior can rewire your own response patterns if you're not careful. How your brain starts preparing for conflict even before it happens, increasing stress without any visible reason. How small interactions with the wrong people can quietly reduce your focus and decision-making ability over time. These are not dramatic events, they are silent effects that build up slowly. And once you understand them, you start seeing why protecting your mental space is not optional, it's necessary. This is not about labeling people or judging them. It's about recognizing patterns and choosing your response wisely. It's about understanding that not every situation deserves your time, your energy, or your attention. And most importantly, it's about realizing that your peace is not something you should risk just to prove a point or win an argument. Because in many cases, the moment you try to win, you've already stepped into a game that was never worth playing. As this video unfolds, each idea will build on the next, giving you a clear, practical way to handle these situations without confusion or emotional exhaustion. You'll see how small changes in your behavior can create a big shift in outcomes, how stepping back at the right moment can prevent unnecessary conflict, and how maintaining control over your reactions can completely change your experience. This is not theory for the sake of theory. This is about real situations, real patterns, and real solutions that you can apply immediately. Stay with this till the end, because the final insight ties everything together in a way that most people miss. It's a shift that, once understood, changes how you deal with difficult people forever. It's not about becoming cold or distant, it's about becoming clear. Clear about what deserves your attention and what doesn't. Clear about where your responsibility ends. And clear about how to protect yourself without losing your calm. Welcome to the channel, a space where clarity replaces confusion and control replaces chaos. If this kind of perspective speaks to you, make sure to subscribe and stay connected, because the more you understand these hidden dynamics, the less power they have over you. It starts in small, ordinary moments that don't look important at first, but they build up over time and slowly begin to affect your mood, your focus, and even the way you see people. A simple conversation turns into an argument for no clear reason. You try to explain something basic, something obvious, but the other person keeps twisting your words, ignoring the point, or reacting in a way that feels completely disconnected from reality. It's not just disagreement, it's something deeper, something more frustrating because it doesn't follow logic. People argue without logic, not because they don't have the ability to understand, but because they are not even trying to understand. They react emotionally before thinking, they jump to conclusions without checking facts, and they create unnecessary chaos in situations that could have been simple and calm. And the strange part is that you often walk into these situations with good intentions, thinking clarity will solve everything, thinking calm communication will fix the issue, thinking patience will eventually make things better. But instead of resolution, you get pulled deeper into confusion. Instead of clarity, you get noise. Instead of calm, you get tension. And slowly, without noticing it immediately, your energy starts draining. You begin to feel tired after conversations that should have been easy. You begin to feel frustrated over things that shouldn't even matter. And the more you try to fix it, the more complicated it becomes. Because you're operating with logic while the other person is operating with impulse. You're trying to solve while they are reacting. You're thinking ahead while they are stuck in the moment. And that mismatch creates friction that no amount of explanation can smooth out. There's a pattern in these interactions that most people miss. It's not random, it repeats itself in different forms with different people in different situations, but the core remains the same. Someone says something careless or irrational, you respond with reason. They ignore the reason and respond with emotion. You try to calm the situation, they escalate it, you explain again more clearly this time, thinking maybe the message wasn't delivered properly. But instead of understanding, they push back harder, as if your clarity is a threat rather than a solution. And before you realize it, the situation has turned into something much bigger than it ever needed to be. Not because the problem was big, but because the response to it was uncontrolled. You try to explain, you try to stay calm, but somehow you still get dragged into their mess. That's the part that feels unfair. You didn't start the chaos, you didn't intend to escalate anything, yet you end up dealing with the consequences. And after it's over, you sit there thinking about what just happened, replaying the conversation in your mind, wondering what you could have said differently, what you could have done better. But that reflection often leads to the wrong conclusion because it assumes the situation was based on logic in the first place. It assumes the other person was open to understanding, open to reason, open to change, and that assumption is where most people go wrong. Because once you assume that everyone operates with the same level of awareness, you start applying the wrong solutions. You keep trying to explain more, thinking clarity is the answer. You keep trying to stay patient, thinking time will fix things. You keep engaging, thinking participation will lead to resolution, but in many cases those actions don't solve the problem, they feed it. They give more space for chaos to grow. They give more opportunities for unnecessary conflict to continue. And the more you engage, the deeper you get pulled into a dynamic that was never meant to be solved through engagement. This is where the shift begins, not in what you say, but in how you see the situation. Because the word people often use in frustration, the word that gets thrown around casually, is misunderstood. When people say idiots, it sounds like an insult, something shallow, something based on intelligence. But this isn't about IQ. It's not about how smart someone is in a technical sense. It's about behavior. It's about patterns of action that show a lack of awareness, a lack of reflection, a lack of control. Because someone can be highly intelligent in one area and still behave in ways that create chaos in another. Intelligence does not automatically translate into awareness, and awareness is what controls behavior. So when we talk about this, we are not talking about people who lack knowledge. We are talking about people who refuse to think, people who have the ability to pause and reflect but choose not to. People who act without awareness, who react without considering consequences, who speak without processing what they are saying. And most importantly, people who drain your energy not because they are trying to, but because their lack of control creates situations that demand more from you than they should. And over time, that demand becomes exhausting. This is why these interactions feel so different from normal disagreements. In a healthy disagreement, both sides are at least trying to understand, even if they don't agree. There is some level of control, some level of reflection, some level of awareness. But in these situations, that balance is missing. One side is trying to think while the other is reacting. One side is trying to resolve while the other is escalating. And that imbalance creates a dynamic where logic has no ground to stand on, because logic requires participation from both sides. Without that, it becomes one-sided effort that leads nowhere. And this is the moment where a deeper insight starts to form. You're not dealing with a lack of intelligence, you're dealing with a lack of control. Control over emotions, control over reactions, control over behavior. And when control is missing, predictability disappears. You can't anticipate how the other person will respond because their responses are not guided by reflection. They are guided by impulse. An impulse is unstable. It changes quickly, it reacts strongly, and it often ignores consequences. That's why these interactions feel chaotic. Because they are. Understanding this changes everything, because it removes the false expectation that logic will fix the situation. It removes the idea that better explanation will lead to better outcomes. And once that expectation is gone, your approach starts to shift. You stop trying to fix something that is not responding to fixing. You stop investing energy into something that is not producing results. And instead, you start focusing on something you actually have control over, which is your own response. Because the real truth, the one that most people resist at first, is simple. You don't win by changing them. You win by changing how you respond. That's where the power is. Not in controlling others, but in controlling your own actions, your own reactions, your own decisions. And this is not about giving up. It's not about accepting bad behavior. It's about recognizing what is within your control and what is not. And once you see that clearly, you stop wasting energy on things that don't change, and you start using that energy to protect yourself instead. There's a quiet strength in that shift. A strength that doesn't need to prove anything, doesn't need to argue, doesn't need to win every point. Because it understands that not every battle is worth fighting. Not every conversation is worth continuing. Not every person is worth explaining yourself to, and that understanding creates distance. Not physical distance necessarily, but mental and emotional distance. A space where you are no longer affected in the same way, no longer pulled into the same patterns, no longer reacting the same way. The moment you stop trying to fix them, you start protecting yourself. And that protection is not about building walls or shutting people out completely. It's about choosing where to invest your attention. It's about deciding when to engage and when to step back. It's about recognizing early signs of irrational behavior and adjusting your response before the situation escalates. Because once you see the pattern, you don't need to go through the entire cycle again. You can interrupt it early by simply not participating in the same way. This doesn't happen instantly. It takes awareness, practice, and a willingness to let go of old habits. The habit of explaining too much, the habit of reacting quickly, the habit of trying to fix everything. These habits feel natural because they come from a place of wanting resolution. But in certain situations, they become the reason the problem continues. And breaking those habits requires a shift in perspective. A shift from solving to observing, from reacting to choosing, from engaging automatically to engaging intentionally. Over time, this shift creates a different kind of experience. The same situations that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. The same people who once drained your energy start to have less impact on you. Not because they changed, but because your response changed. And that change reduces the friction, reduces the conflict, reduces the emotional cost of these interactions. It doesn't eliminate them completely, because behavior patterns in others don't disappear overnight, but it changes your role in those patterns. It takes you out of the reactive position and places you in a controlled position. And that control is what most people are actually looking for, even if they don't realize it. Not control over others, but control over themselves. Control over how they feel, how they respond, how much they allow external behavior to affect their internal state. Because once you have that, the chaos around you loses its power. It becomes noise instead of influence. It becomes something you notice but don't absorb. And that difference is what protects your peace in a world where not everyone operates with awareness. The challenge is that this way of thinking goes against instinct. Instinct tells you to respond, to defend, to explain, to correct. Instinct pushes you to engage, especially when something feels wrong or unfair. But not every instinct leads to a good outcome. And in these situations, following instinct often leads you deeper into the same cycle. That's why awareness matters, because awareness allows you to pause, to recognize the pattern, and to choose a different response instead of repeating the same one. And once you begin to make that choice consistently, something interesting starts to happen. The situations don't disappear, but their impact does. The frustration decreases, the tension fades, and the need to prove yourself slowly disappears, because you are no longer playing the same game. You are no longer reacting in the same way, and without your reaction, the dynamic changes, not always dramatically, but enough to create space, enough to protect your energy, enough to keep your clarity intact. This is not about being perfect. There will still be moments where you get pulled in, moments where you react before thinking, moments where old habits take over. But the difference is that you start noticing those moments faster. You start correcting yourself sooner. And over time, those moments become less frequent, less intense, less impactful. Because awareness, once developed, doesn't disappear. It grows stronger with use. And as it grows, so does your ability to navigate these situations without losing yourself in the process, without getting dragged into unnecessary conflict, without carrying frustration long after the interaction is over. Because at the end of the day, the goal is not to eliminate difficult people from your life completely. That's not always possible. The goal is to eliminate their ability to control your state of mind. And that begins with a simple but powerful shift. Stop trying to fix them. Start focusing on how you respond. There is a pattern that repeats in almost every frustrating interaction, and once you notice it clearly, you start seeing how predictable it actually is. The moment someone begins to act without thinking, the moment their tone shifts from calm to reactive, the moment logic disappears and emotion takes over, something else quietly happens at the same time. They are not just expressing themselves, they are pulling you into their state. It is subtle at first, almost invisible, but it grows quickly. A small comment triggers a response, that response triggers another reaction, and suddenly you are no longer observing the situation, you are inside it. This is how the game begins. Not a game in the playful sense, but a pattern of behavior that feeds on reaction. Because people who act without awareness often rely on emotional responses to keep the interaction alive. They don't need clarity, they need engagement. And the moment you react, even with logic, even with calm words, you step into that pattern. That is why the first and most important shift is simple but not easy. Do not engage in their game. It sounds obvious on the surface, but in practice it goes against instinct. Because when something feels wrong, your mind wants to correct it. When someone says something irrational, your first reaction is to explain why it is wrong. When someone behaves unfairly, your instinct is to defend yourself. These reactions feel justified, and in many situations they are. But in this specific dynamic, they become the entry point into a cycle that does not lead to resolution. Because the other person is not responding to logic, they are responding to emotion. And when emotion is the driving force, logic becomes background noise. Idiots pull you into emotional reactions, not always intentionally, but consistently. They create pressure that pushes you to respond quickly instead of thoughtfully. They shift the focus from what is true to what feels intense in the moment. And if you follow that shift, you lose control of the interaction. Not because you are weak, but because you are now playing by rules that don't lead anywhere. If you react, you lose. Not in the sense of winning or losing an argument, but in the sense of losing your clarity, your calm, your control over the situation. Because once you are reacting, you are no longer choosing your response. You are following the energy that was created by someone else. There is a different kind of strength that most people overlook. It does not look loud or forceful. It does not try to dominate the conversation or prove a point. It is quiet, controlled, and deliberate. It is the ability to pause instead of react. The ability to stay silent when a reaction is expected. The ability to step back when engagement seems automatic. Silence is not weakness, it is control. It is the decision to not participate in a pattern that leads nowhere. It is the refusal to give energy to something that does not deserve it. And in many cases, it is the most effective response because it breaks the cycle before it can grow. This does not mean you never speak or never respond. It means you choose when to speak and how to respond instead of reacting immediately. It means you recognize when a conversation is no longer productive and allow it to end without forcing closure. It means you stop trying to fix every misunderstanding and start protecting your own state of mind. Because not every interaction deserves your attention, and not every situation improves with more words. From here, another shift becomes necessary, one that changes how you interact with people without creating unnecessary conflict. Set invisible boundaries. This is where most people struggle because they think boundaries require confrontation, explanation, or approval from others. But real boundaries do not need to be announced. They are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They are about controlling your own participation. Not everything needs a confrontation. In fact, many situations become worse when you turn them into direct conflicts. Distance is often more effective than drama. Stepping back quietly removes you from the pattern without feeding it further. You don't need to announce your boundaries, just enforce them. This means changing your behavior without making it a discussion. It means limiting your responses, reducing your availability, choosing when to engage and when to disengage. It means not responding to every message, not reacting to every comment, not participating in every argument. And the key part is consistency, because boundaries only work when they are maintained over time. If you step back once and then return to the same pattern, nothing changes. But if you consistently reduce your participation, the dynamic begins to shift. Not because the other person suddenly understands, but because the structure of the interaction changes. There is also a habit that keeps people trapped in these situations longer than necessary, and it feels productive even when it is not. The habit of over-explaining. The belief that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, calmly enough, thoroughly enough, the other person will finally understand. But in many cases, they don't misunderstand you, they choose not to understand. Not always consciously, but consistently. Because understanding requires effort, and effort requires awareness. And when awareness is low, that effort does not happen. So you explain again and again and again, each time adding more detail, more examples, more clarity. But instead of solving the issue, it creates more space for confusion, more opportunities for misinterpretation, more chances for the conversation to drift away from the original point. Over-explaining becomes a form of giving away control, because the more you try to justify yourself, the more the focus shifts onto your explanation instead of the behavior that created the problem in the first place. Clarity is not for them, it is for you. It is your internal understanding of what is happening, your recognition of the pattern, your awareness of what deserves your attention and what does not. Once you have that clarity, you do not need to keep repeating yourself. You do not need to convince someone who is not open to being convinced. You do not need to turn every disagreement into a detailed discussion. Sometimes the most powerful response is a simple one, a short answer or no answer at all, because the goal is not to be understood by everyone. The goal is to stay in control of your own response. As you reduce unnecessary engagement and stop over-explaining, something else becomes more visible. The cost of these interactions, not just in time, but in energy. Because some people do not take your time, they take your peace. They leave you thinking about the conversation long after it is over. They create tension that stays with you, affecting your mood, your focus, your ability to be present in other parts of your life. And this cost is often ignored because it is not immediately visible, but over time it adds up. Protecting your energy becomes essential, not as a vague idea, but as a practical action. It means limiting exposure to situations that consistently drain you. It means choosing your battles carefully instead of reacting to everything. It means recognizing early signs of patterns that lead to frustration and stepping back before they fully develop. Because once you are deep into the interaction, it becomes harder to disengage. But at the beginning, the choice is easier. A small decision to not respond, a small decision to not engage, can prevent a much larger problem later. This does not mean avoiding all difficult situations. It means being selective. It means understanding that not every issue needs your involvement and not every opinion needs your response. It means focusing your energy on things that actually matter, things that move you forward, instead of pulling you into cycles that go nowhere. And as you do this consistently, you begin to feel a difference. Less tension, less frustration, more clarity. Because your energy is no longer scattered across unnecessary conflicts. At the same time, there is another layer to this process that often gets overlooked. Emotional attachment to interactions. The tendency to take things personally, to feel affected by every comment, every reaction, every misunderstanding. But not everything deserves your feelings. Not every situation requires emotional investment. And when you treat every interaction as something important, you give it more weight than it deserves. Detaching emotionally does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means creating space between what happens and how you feel about it. It means recognizing that someone else's behavior is a reflection of their state, not a definition of your worth. It means allowing things to exist without absorbing them. Just because someone is loud does not mean they are right. Just because someone reacts strongly does not mean their reaction is justified. Volume is not validity, and intensity is not truth. Calm detachment is a skill. It develops over time through awareness and practice. It starts with small moments, choosing not to react immediately, choosing to observe instead of absorb. It grows as you begin to notice patterns without getting pulled into them. And eventually it becomes a natural way of responding. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel neutral, not because they changed, but because your relationship to them changed. This is where everything begins to come together in a deeper way. Because once you stop engaging unnecessarily, set boundaries quietly, reduce over-explaining, protect your energy, and detach emotionally, you begin to see the bigger picture more clearly. The truth is not complicated, but it is often overlooked. The truth is that idiots do not destroy your life. Your reactions to them do. That is the part that is hardest to accept, because it shifts responsibility inward. It removes the idea that the problem is entirely external and places the focus on your own behavior. But this is also where your power is, because you cannot control how others behave, but you can control how you respond. You cannot force awareness in someone else, but you can maintain awareness in yourself. You cannot stop every irrational action, but you can decide whether or not you participate in it. And that decision changes everything. It determines whether a situation grows or ends, whether it drains you or passes by without impact. That's where your power is. Not in changing others, but in choosing yourself. Not in controlling the environment, but in controlling your response to it. And once that becomes clear, the entire dynamic shifts, quietly but permanently, in a way that continues to unfold with every interaction that follows. If this felt real, it's because you've lived it, not once, but in small moments that kept repeating until you started questioning your own peace. And the truth is, you're not the only one going through this. There are so many people silently dealing with the same patterns, the same frustration, the same drain that doesn't come from big events but from everyday interactions that slowly take more than they should. But now you see it differently. Now you understand that you don't need to fight every battle, you don't need to explain everything, and you don't need to carry what was never yours to carry in the first place. That awareness changes everything. It gives you space, it gives you control, and most importantly, it gives you back your peace. So stay sharp, stay in control, Protect your energy like it matters, because it does more than most people realize. And if this gave you clarity, if it helped you see things from a different angle, then don't let it stop here. Stay connected with this space, because there's more coming that will help you think clearer, respond better, and move through life without getting pulled into unnecessary chaos. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need this reminder but doesn't know how to put it into words yet.